It looked like just another stray kitten, frail, filthy, trembling, but within seconds the truth hit. This wasn't a house cat. It was a wild bobcat, starving, freezing, minutes from death. Most people would have walked away. One man didn't, and that choice would change everything. From a forgotten corner of an abandoned depot, a cry for help became the start of a bond no one believed possible. A bobcat who should have feared humans instead found comfort in them, and what began as a rescue turned into the world's most unlikely story of trust, survival, and love. One desperate cry, one impossible hug, and a wild cat that broke every rule. The railway depot had been crumbling for decades, a skeleton of Montana's old freight lines. Rust bled down the concrete walls, shattered panes gaped like hollow eyes, and on this late autumn evening the air smelled of wet leaves and iron. Walter Harris walked with the unhurried shuffle of a man who had nowhere particular to be. At 68, he knew every crack in the sidewalks of Helena, every alley where wind carried the dry smell of grain from the mills. His heavy jacket sagged on his shoulders, patched at the elbows. A wool cap shadowed his grey eyes. Most evenings he walked to keep the silence of his small apartment at bay. Ever since Marjorie had passed, the walls pressed in on him. Walking gave him air to breathe, but tonight something stopped him. A sound, faint, thin. Almost too soft to be real, Walter tilted his head. The cry came again, piercing, desperate. He frowned, following the sound past a tangle of weeds that had split the asphalt. The depot loomed, its broken crates spilling like old bones. And then he saw it. At first, he thought it was a filthy kitten. Huddled in the corner where concrete met shadow, its body quivered with each ragged breath. Wet fur clung to ribs. It was no larger than a man's hand. Walter bent carefully, joints creaking, and froze. The ears, too long, tipped with dark tufts. The eyes, liquid amber, too sharp, too wild for a house cat. His heart stumbled. "A bobcat," he whispered, breath clouding. The kitten hissed weakly, a sound more pitiful than fierce. It pressed against the wall as if trying to disappear. Walter crouched lower, hands open. "Easy now, nobody's gonna hurt you." His voice was a rasp, but gentle. "Lord help us both. What are you doing here?" The animal didn't move. Its paws were raw, fur smeared with grime. Walter's chest tightened. He remembered the winter of '89, the stray dog he hadn't been able to save from the snow. The regret had lingered for years. He wouldn't let that happen again. Not tonight. He fumbled with his phone, old fingers stiff in the cold. The number came back to him like a hymn. Big Sky, Wildlife Haven. The dispatcher's voice was brisk, but kind. "Stay with him. Don't touch. Dr. Carter is on her way." Walter lowered himself onto an overturned crate, knees aching, keeping his eyes on the tiny figure. "Don't you quit on me," he muttered. The kitten's sides heaved, each breath fragile. Walter rubbed his calloused palms together, wishing warmth could travel across the space between them. Minutes dragged. Shadows deepened. The sound of an engine broke the stillness, headlights sweeping across broken windows. A white truck pulled up, its logo painted with a fading hawk silhouette. Out stepped Dr. Emily Carter, 41, tall and lean, auburn hair tucked into a braid. She moved with calm efficiency, her boots crunching gravel. In her hands a towel, a soft crate, a quiet determination. Walter rose, pointing with a trembling finger. "Over there, behind the crates." Emily crouched without hesitation, her breath puffed steady as she edged forward. The kitten's eyes flared. It tried to hiss, but the sound was barely a whisper. Emily's gloved hands slid the towel around the trembling body. She lifted gently, wrapping it close. The animal whimpered once, then went still against the warmth. "Male," she murmured, brushing damp fur from his forehead. "Just weeks old. He wouldn't have lasted the night." Walter exhaled, shoulders sagging with relief. "Poor thing," he muttered. Emily looked at him, reading the ache in his weathered face. "You saved his life, calling me." Walter swallowed, voice rough. "Didn't save much in my time." He stared at the bundle against her chest. "But maybe this one I can." Emily stood, the kitten tucked against her coat. His tiny chest rose and fell in uneven rhythm. She shifted him closer, murmuring something only he could hear. Walter stepped aside as she carried the crate back toward her truck. The depot loomed silent again, but the night felt less empty. The kitten gave one last faint cry before settling into the dark towel. And though Walter could not know it yet, this fragile life would not simply survive. He would grow, and with him a story that would ripple through countless others. A dying kitten, a broken depot, and a choice that would ripple far beyond Helena's quiet streets. The truck's headlights cut a pale ribbon across the prairie road as Emily Carter pressed harder on the accelerator. The bundle in the crate beside her gave the faintest shudder, then stilled. Her hand shot from the steering wheel to brush against the towel, making sure she still felt breath moving through the tiny chest. "Stay with me, little one," she whispered, voice low, steady, though her pulse was a drum in her ears. The haven appeared at last, lanterns glowing against the dark. It was no glossy facility, just a converted barn painted red long ago, now dulled by weather. A windmill groaned in the distance. Wooden fencing framed the pens where owls, hawks, and foxes waited in their own recoveries. Emily parked, swung the crate into her arms, and hurried across the gravel. Inside, warmth hit like a wave. Space heaters hummed along the barn walls. Metal pens lined each side, hawks with bandaged wings, a raccoon curled beneath a blanket, a red fox blinking groggily after medication. All of them were survivors in transition, and now another fragile guest was arriving. "Lucas!" she called. From the far end, a young man came rushing, 21, with a mop of dark curls and eyes too earnest for the midnight hour. He wore jeans, smudged with hay, and a hoodie with the Haven's faded logo. "What is it?" he asked, breathless, already pulling on gloves. Emily set the crate down on a padded table. She peeled back the towel. The kitten twitched, sides rising in shallow bursts. Lucas's eyes widened. "A bobcat." "Hypothermic," Emily said, clinical but tight-voiced. She touched the animal's paw, noting its cracked pads. "Dehydrated, pads are raw. He's been wandering." Lucas moved quickly, fetching syringes, formula, warm saline. Emily slipped a tiny catheter into the fragile vein of one foreleg. Fluids trickled in. The kitten whimpered. "Easy," she soothed. "That's it. Don't give up on me." Lucas hovered. He's so small." Smaller than he should be. Emily adjusted the heating pad under the blanket. "Keep his temperature stable. If it drops again—" The sentence trailed off. Both of them knew what it meant. Hours blurred. They worked in shifts, one watching, one tending, one whispering into the stillness when silence grew too heavy. At 3 a.m., Lucas sat slouched on a stool, cradling a bottle like it was a lifeline. Will he even make it through the night? Emily didn't look up. Her hand rested lightly against the kitten's chest, counting heartbeats. "I don't know." Her voice was quiet, but not defeated. She had seen enough animals fall away despite everything she did. Sometimes they chose to stay. The kitten stirred, weak head lifting. His amber eyes met hers for the first time. The sound that came from his throat was half cry, half sigh. Lucas straightened. "He's fighting!" Emily swallowed, forcing herself to breathe. "Yes, he is." She touched his fur, careful, reverent. The kitten blinked slowly, as if anchoring himself to her face. Lucas grinned faintly, though his eyes were wet from exhaustion. "He needs a name." Emily shot him a look. "We don't name them." "It's bad luck?" "It's attachment," she corrected. "Makes it harder to let them go." But when the kitten pressed his nose weakly against her hand, Lucas said it anyway. "Valor." Emily froze. "Because that's what he's got," Lucas said. "More courage in him than anything." The barn settled into stillness again, broken only by the soft ticking of the heater and the kitten's shallow breaths. Emily should have scolded him, but she didn't. Her thumb brushed along the kitten's tiny spine. "Valor," she whispered, almost against her own will. And for the first time that night the little bobcat purred. Weak, rattling, fragile, but undeniably alive. Emily closed her eyes. Relief washed through her chest like warmth in winter. The night wasn't over, but hope had arrived, and it had a name. The battle was only beginning. And already the bobcat had a name he would never let go of. Morning bled into a softer light, pale against the wide Montana plains. Inside the haven, the bobcat kitten slept curled on a fleece blanket, his sides moving with steadier rhythm now. The IV line was gone, replaced with a small bottle of formula that Emily had coaxed him to accept just before dawn. Days blurred into weeks. Each hour felt like a delicate bargain struck between life and loss. But slowly, Valor began to change. His coat, once dull and ragged, deepened into a tawny sheen streaked with faint spots. His ears pricked more sharply, their black tufts like tiny banners, and his eyes, burning gold, grew brighter with each passing day. Every recovery was different, but this one unsettled Emily, because Valor wanted her. It began subtly. The way he would stir from sleep the moment she entered the barn, his small body stretching with an awkward kitten's grace. His paws would scrabble toward her, not the bottle, not the food, but her shadow. "Lucas," Emily said one evening, watching as the kitten ignored the feeding tube and squeaked in agitation. "Try the bottle again." Lucas crouched, offering the long, nippled bottle through the pen's mesh. Valor sniffed, pawed at it, then turned his head. His gaze swung instead to Emily, who stood with arms crossed. He let out a pitiful cry. Lucas frowned. "He doesn't want me." Emily sighed, pulling on gloves. She knelt, sliding her hand through. Instantly, Valor pressed into her palm, nuzzling, purring with a rumble too big for his size. His paws kneaded at her wrist like a domestic kitten. Only then did he accept the bottle, drinking greedily as long as she held it. Lucas blinked. He needs you." Emily's chest tightened. This was not what she had hoped. She tried to set boundaries. She rigged up bottle holders. She sat across the barn during feedings, leaving Lucas to manage. But Valor would cry until his voice cracked, claws scratching the mesh, eyes darting frantically until she returned. "You're spoiling him," Lucas muttered once, though he said it with more awe than blame. "I'm imprinting him," Emily corrected, tone heavy, "and that's dangerous. For wild animals, survival depended on fear of humans. Fear kept them alive, and yet Valor purred whenever she approached, as if he knew nothing of danger, as if he had chosen her as his mother. One afternoon, Emily decided to intervene differently. She arranged for Aspen, another orphaned bobcat of similar age, to be introduced. Aspen was wiry, her coat a lighter tan, her spirit fierce from the start. Emily set their pens side by side, Valor perked, ears forward, curiosity flashing in his eyes. Aspen hissed, a thin sound of wild distrust. "They'll figure it out," Emily murmured, more to herself than Lucas. The next morning, she tried moving Valor into Aspen's pen. Aspen darted forward, paw raised. For a heartbeat, Emily thought Valor would recoil. But instead he chirped, a kitten's innocent sound, and pressed against her instead. Aspen froze, confused, then slipped away to a corner, tail lashing. Valor ignored her. He trotted after Emily as she moved to the door, his tiny form colliding with her boot as if to beg, "Don't leave me." Emily pressed a hand to her forehead. He's not bonding with his own kind. Lucas leaned against the wall, his gaze soft. Maybe he already decided where he belongs. But that was exactly what haunted Emily. Late nights, when the barn was quiet, she'd sit beside his pen, notebook open. She wrote notes in clinical terms, hydration, diet, weight gain. But in the margins, her hand betrayed her, purred when I touched his paw, looked at me when afraid, won't sleep unless I'm near. Every animal at the haven came with risk, but Valor's risk was different. Not that he would die, though he had nearly done that, but that he would live believing humans were his world, and that meant he could never go back to the wild. Emily watched him one evening, his small body sprawled on his back, paws twitching in sleep. His chest rose with soft, steady breaths. He had survived the depot, the cold, the hunger. But survival, she realized, was only the first chapter. The real story, the one that would shape both their lives, was just beginning. He was healing. But the more he healed, the more he looked for her, and only her. The barn smelled faintly of hay and antiseptic, the hum of the heaters steady against the chill of November. Emily moved methodically through her evening rounds, checking IV drips, sweeping straw, refilling dishes with thawed mice for the hawks and fresh water for the fox. Valor was supposed to be secure in his holding pen, supposed to be. Emily was crouched near a red-tailed hawk's enclosure, scrubbing a feeding tray, when a shadow flickered across the floorboards. She turned, just in time to see tawny fur dart between the pens. "Valor!" Her voice caught as the kitten, larger now, stronger in his movements, scrambled up a pile of stacked feed sacks. He balanced for a beat on the top, amber eyes fixed on her back. His muscles bunched. Before she could move, he leapt. Instinct screamed danger. Emily froze, bracing for claws. But when his weight landed against her shoulders, it wasn't sharp or violent. Tiny paws wrapped clumsily around her neck, his face pressed into the collar of her jacket. He clung, not like a predator, but like a child refusing to let go. Emily's breath hitched. "Emily!" Lucas's voice rang from across the barn. He'd just returned from refilling the feed bins. When he saw her stiff posture, Valor draped across her like a scarf, his mouth dropped open. "Is he hugging you?" Emily stood rooted, uncertain whether to pry him off or surrender to the moment. Valor purred, the vibration rattling through her spine. His tiny claws pricked, but not enough to hurt, just enough to anchor. She raised a hand slowly, steadying his back. He nuzzled deeper, kneading the fabric at her shoulder with small, insistent paws. Lucas laughed, the sound startled, but bright. "That's insane. I thought wildcats, they're not supposed to—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "He's hugging you." Emily exhaled, her body softening as the tension ebbed. She had spent her career maintaining distance, reminding herself that these animals were temporary, that their trust was not meant for her, but for survival. And yet, here he was, choosing her, wrapping her in something that felt both impossible and undeniable. "Valor," she whispered. The name slipped from her like a secret. The kitten chirped in response, a soft sound muffled against her neck. Lucas grinned, shaking his head in disbelief. "Guess you've been adopted?" Emily managed a small, wry smile, though her eyes glistened in the low barn light. She pried Valor gently from her shoulders and set him back on the floor. He circled once, then reared onto his hind legs, reaching his paws toward her again. This time, she didn't resist. She crouched, letting him press against her chest. His warmth bled into her, his purr steady as a heartbeat. From that night on, the ritual repeated. Every time she entered, Valor came running, standing tall on his hind legs, stretching his arms toward her like a child asking to be lifted. And every time, when she bent to meet him, he wrapped his paws around her in that strange, tender embrace. It became his signature, an unspoken language between them, a wildcat's hug. Emily knew what it meant, knew the risks it carried. But in the quiet of the barn, with his heart pressed against hers, logic slipped away. All that remained was the steady rhythm of breath and the undeniable truth of connection. From that moment on, hugs weren't accidents. They were his language, and he would speak it only to her. Winter settled heavy on the plains. Snow crusted the pastures, and the barn's tin roof groaned under the weight of ice. Within its walls, Valor grew. No longer a fragile scrap of fur, he had stretched into a sleek, muscular juvenile. His paws were massive, comically oversized at first, promising the predator he was meant to become. By his first spring, he weighed nearly 30 pounds, but his spirit, that remained different. Emily saw it in the way he greeted her. Each morning, before she finished unlatching the barn door, Valor would be there, ears perked, tail twitching, amber eyes glowing with expectation. He would rise up on his hind legs, balancing awkwardly, and reach for her waist. When she bent down, he looped his forelegs around her, as though embracing her, burying his face against her coat. A bobcat should have hissed or bolted. But Valor hugged. Lucas found it hilarious. "You realize he thinks you're his mum, right?" he said one morning, watching as Valor stretched his full length along Emily's torso, paws gripping her shoulders. "Most people get snarled at. You get bear hugs." Emily gave him a look, though she couldn't suppress the faintest smile. "It's not a joke, Lucas. He's imprinted." Lucas scratched his jaw. "I mean, yeah, but it's kind of amazing, isn't it?" Amazing, yes, and troubling. By spring, the signs were undeniable. Emily had tried to encourage wild behaviors, introducing enrichment toys, setting up carcass feedings, building climbing platforms. Valor would leap and stalk, muscles bunching like any bobcat. But always his eyes sought hers. Always he circled back, pressing against her for reassurance. And then came the exam. Dr. Naomi Chen arrived one blustery March afternoon. At 50, with short-cropped hair and decades of wildlife medicine behind her, she carried an air of pragmatic authority. She had seen countless animals deemed unreleasable. Still, she insisted on evaluations before decisions were made. Valor was sedated lightly for the checkup. His breathing deepened as Emily stroked his fur, guilt twisting in her stomach at the way he trusted her, even through the fog of anesthesia. Naomi pressed the stethoscope against his chest, her brow furrowing. She listened longer than usual, adjusting the instrument, her lips pursed. "What is it?" Emily asked. Naomi straightened, removing the earpieces. A heart murmur, mild but distinct. Emily's chest sank. "Nothing that prevents him from living a long life," Naomi continued, scribbling notes. "But out there, competing for territory, prey, mates, He wouldn't make it. He's not built for the wild. Lucas leaned against the counter, expression sober. So, what happens now? Naomi's gaze landed on Emily. That's your call, but I can tell you this much. This bobcat cannot be released. The words hung heavy in the barn. Emily stroked Valor's ear as the sedative kept him still. His chest rose with steady breaths, oblivious to the sentence being decided for him. He deserves a life, Emily said softly, even if it can't be the one he was born for. Naomi gave a curt nod. Then you find him another purpose. The weeks that followed brought both relief and ache. Relief that Valor would live under care, safe from the brutalities of the wild. Ache that he would never know the freedom his kind was meant for. Emily struggled with it late at night, her hands wrapped around mugs of cooling tea, staring at the dark prairie beyond her window. Yet Valor himself seemed unaware of the gravity of these choices. He grew stronger, his stride confident, his leaps across the platforms breathtaking, and always, always he returned to her with those improbable hugs. One evening, as the last light bled violet across the sky, Emily stood inside his expanded pen, brushing straw from her jeans. Valor padded toward her, now nearly up to her waist, when he reared on hind legs. He placed his paws against her chest, his weight solid, pressing close until his head tucked against her neck. Lucas watched from outside the mesh, shaking his head in wonder. A 30-pound bobcat that hugs like a toddler. Emily, that's not normal. No, she whispered, tightening her arms around him. It's not. But as Valor purred against her, she knew, with aching certainty, it was their normal, and it would have to be enough. He would never return to the wild. But perhaps, in losing one life, Valor was being led toward another. By summer, the decision was no longer just an unspoken truth. It was official. Valor would never return to the wilderness. Emily spent weeks on paperwork, submitting medical records, behavior notes, and Naomi Chen's evaluation to the State Wildlife Board. The process was long, full of language about liability and ethics, but when the letter arrived stamped approved, Emily exhaled as though she had been holding her breath for months. Valor was now classified as a non-releasable bobcat, granted special status as an educational ambassador. But words on paper weren't enough. He needed a home suited for the life ahead. On the north edge of the haven, a new enclosure rose from the prairie. Emily and Lucas built it with their own hands, assisted by volunteers who had grown fond of the story of the hugging bobcat. Tall fencing circled an acre of land. Inside were climbing logs, shaded platforms, and a small pool that caught the sunlight like glass. It wasn't the forest, but it was space. It was sky. When Emily opened the transfer crate for the first time, Valor leapt out, landing with a grace that startled everyone watching. He sprinted the length of the pen, bounded onto a log, then turned sharply, ears forward, eyes on Emily. And then, just as he always had, he padded over, rose up on hind legs, and wrapped his paws around her waist. Laughter rippled through the small crowd of volunteers, but Emily's eyes softened with something deeper. "Welcome home, Valor," she whispered. Training began slowly. Not tricks, not entertainment. Emily refused to cross that line. Instead, she guided him into natural demonstrations, leaping from platform to platform, displaying his incredible paws, standing tall on hind legs as he stretched into a hug. Children gasped. Teachers leaned forward, parents clutched cameras. At school visits, Emily's voice carried both warmth and warning. "He's not a pet," she would tell classrooms, her hand steady on Valor's harness as he purred against her shoulder. "This is a bobcat. He belongs to the wild. His story teaches us why wild animals must stay wild, Compassion saved him, but he's the exception, not the rule. The children rarely heard her words first. They saw the hug. They saw the bond, the quiet affection between woman and Bobcat. But later, when the bus rolled away, they carried her message with them, that love for wildlife meant respecting its boundaries. One day, after a presentation, a girl no older than 9 approached, clutching a notebook covered in sketches of owls and foxes. She looked up shyly. "When I grow up, I want to help animals, like you." Emily's throat tightened. She crouched, meeting the girl's eyes. "Then you already know what matters most." She gestured toward Valor, who sat calmly, amber eyes watchful. "Every life counts, even the ones that can't go back." Valor blinked slowly, then rose to place his paws on Emily's shoulder, curling against her in that now familiar embrace. The girl's face lit with awe. Later, when the buses had left and the enclosure was quiet again, Emily leaned against the fence, watching Valor patrol his space. His coat glowed gold in the slant of evening light. He had been born to vanish into forests, to stalk rabbits under the cover of snow. Instead, he had been carried into a different fate, one he never chose, but one he had made his own. And as his purr rumbled through the dusk, Emily realized this new role was not a compromise. It was a calling. He was no longer a secret rescue. He was a teacher. A living bridge between the wild and the human heart. It began with a single photo. One of the volunteers had snapped a moment during a school visit. Valor rising on his hind legs, paws hooked around Emily's shoulders, his head buried against her cheek. The caption read simply, "The Hugging Bobcat." Within days, the photos spread across social media. Within weeks, videos followed, clips of Valor leaping between platforms, of his enormous paws patting gently at Emily's sleeve, of the way he melted into her arms like a child. The internet did what it always does. It magnified. Millions watched. Donations poured in from strangers who had never heard of the Big Sky wildlife haven before. Letters arrived with crayon drawings from children, with notes from elderly couples who said Valor reminded them of the pets they had lost, with checks from people who believed in the work because a hug had touched them. Families began driving hours, sometimes across state lines, just to catch a glimpse of him in his enclosure. Reporters came, cameras clicking as Emily repeated the same refrain. "He's not a pet. He's a bobcat who could not survive in the wild. His story reminds us why wild animals belong in the wild and why compassion matters." But fame is a strange companion. Some visitors nodded solemnly, listening, understanding. Others only wanted the spectacle, their cell phones raised, eager to capture the hug as if it were a circus act. Emily's jaw tightened every time she saw it, but Valor never seemed to care. He simply leaned against her when she entered, rumbling his steady purr, blind to the noise beyond the fence. Lucas teased her once, grinning as he scrolled through yet another viral clip. "He's more famous than you know." Emily shook her head. "Good, let it be him. If his story keeps even one wild animal safe, then it's worth it." In quiet hours, when the barn lights glowed against the prairie dark, Emily would watch Valor asleep, his chest rising slow and strong. The world saw a sensation. She saw the fragile creature from the depot corner, still clinging, still surviving. And though the world called him the Hugging Bobcat, to her he was simply Valor, the life that had changed everything. His hugs touched the world. But the lesson behind them mattered even more. The seasons spun by, years folding one into another across the Montana plains. Snowdrifts gave way to spring blossoms, summers burned hot and dry, and each autumn painted the cottonwoods in gold. Through it all, Valor grew older. His once vivid muzzle carried a dusting of grey now, silver threads woven into tawny fur. His paws, once oversized and clumsy, had long since grown into their power, but his stride slowed. Still, every morning when Emily stepped into the enclosure, he rose onto his hind legs, reaching for her as he always had. The hugs had softened, but they had never stopped. Children who had once pressed wide-eyed faces to the haven's fences were grown now. Some returned with college sweatshirts and notebooks filled with wildlife sketches. Others wrote letters to Emily from veterinary schools, ranger stations, conservation programs. They spoke of the day they met Valor, the bobcat who taught them that wildness was fragile, that care could change everything. One autumn morning, a familiar figure arrived at the haven. Walter Harris shuffled through the gates, leaning on a cane. His breath misted in the cool air as Emily met him with a smile. "You remember the depot?" he asked, voice raspy with age. "I think about it all the time," Emily said. She led him to the enclosure. Valor was sunning himself on a platform, eyes half closed when he spotted her. He rose slowly, stretching, then padded down. When he saw Walter beside her, he paused, tilting his head. Walter chuckled. "He remembers, doesn't he?" Emily watched as Valor approached, pressing his broad head against the fence where Walter stood. The old man lifted a trembling hand, resting it against the mesh. "You've done well, boy," Walter whispered. "Better than I ever could have hoped." In that moment, Emily felt the circle close, the depot, the cry in the shadows, the decision to call for help. One man's choice had given a life not just to Valor, but to every child inspired, every animal saved through the haven's growing work. Valor's story had become a legacy stretching far beyond the barn, and it was still unfolding, hug by hug. A single rescue had become a lifetime of ripples, and Valor was at the center of them all. Evenings on the prairie always carried a kind of hush, an endless sky deepening from gold to indigo, the sound of wind sweeping across grass like a breath that never stopped. Emily often lingered at the enclosure fence during these hours, watching the way dusk softened Valor's outline, turning him into a silhouette against the falling dark. He was older now, his gait was slower, his muzzle streaked with silver, but the light in his eyes had never dimmed, and every night, as faithfully as sunrise, he rose onto his hind legs and reached for her. The hug, their ritual, a bond both ordinary and impossible. Emily leaned into it, as she always did. Her arms encircled him gently, her face pressed against the rough warmth of his fur. His purr vibrated through her ribs, steady and grounding. She had spent her life believing wild animals belonged to the wild. It was a principle she carried like scripture, but Valor had rewritten it. Some creatures, through circumstance or fate, found another path. His purpose had not been to vanish into mountains and hunt rabbits beneath the snow. His purpose had been to stay, to teach, to bridge, to soften hearts that might never have cared otherwise. Every child who became a vet, every donation that kept the haven's doors open, every fox, hawk, or fawn healed because Valor's story reached the right ears. That was his wildness now, transformed into something no less powerful. Emily closed her eyes, whispering the words she had carried like a prayer since the beginning. "Thank you for trusting me." Valor shifted, pressing his head closer into her shoulder. The purr deepened. It was his answer, the same one he had given from the moment he first survived the night. In the stillness, Emily lifted her gaze to the horizon where the last light bled away. Some bonds, she thought, don't end. They change shape. They leave echoes. They carry forward, quiet and eternal, like paw prints pressed into soft earth, long after the animal has gone. She held him tighter, breathing in the silence. Some stories end in release. Valor's story ended in presence, an embrace that would outlast time itself.